Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbity Bobbity Books. My name is Ellie and today we're going to be talking about some short fantasy books. So fantasy can be a really intimidating genre. I feel like most fantasy books are really chunky. They're normally, 500 plus pages long and also tend to be part of really long series. And that can be hugely intimidating to a lot of people, myself included. And so today I thought it would be fun to recommend to you some shorter fantasy books that perhaps don't require you to dedicate hours and hours and days of your time to them. Books that you can read perhaps in one sitting or in just a couple of sittings, and books that are kind of a self-contained story really, and so you can just enjoy it for what it is and then move on to something different. So if you're wanting to just try out a little bit of fantasy, if you're in the mood for that genre but you don't want to dedicate yourself to a big long chunky series, then hopefully you'll find some recommendations today in this video. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump straight in with some recommendations for you. So the first recommendation for you is an author, and that is of course Terry Pratchett. So Terry Pratchett is a famous author of the Discworld series, which is a series of 41 books that all take place in the same world, and that series starts with The Colour of Magic, but you don't have to start there, and in fact a lot of people recommend that you don't start there because Terry Pratchett's writing actually improves with time, and so a lot of people get on a bit better with some of his later novels. And I know I said that I wasn't going to recommend a big long series to you, and here I am talking about a series of 41 books, but don't worry, you can read these all as standalones. Each story is self-contained and it's just a new story within the same universe. Within the wider Discworld there are also some sub-series that follow the same sort of characters. So a good place to start, for example, might be with the book Mort, which is the first book in the Death series, which famously has the character of Death in the series, who is a fantastic character, really funny and just a great time. So that would be a good place to start. Or you could also start with Guards, which is another really popular story, and that is the first in the City Watch series. So those might be some good places for you to start, but like I said, you can pick up any of these books really, and what I love about them is that they're all pretty quick. So they are all usually under 300 pages, so they're nice and short and they're easy to read, but they're also really clever. It has a lot of silly humour, yes, but these books also make you think about societal norms and our expectations, our beliefs, our assumptions. And Terry Pratchett also raises some really interesting discussions about morality and religion, but it's all done in quite a light-hearted way. So yeah, these books are great if you're looking for something fun, if you're looking for something a little bit silly, a little bit kooky, but also something that talks about some interesting stuff, then I highly recommend this series. Terry Pratchett is just a master of satire and his novels are just fantastic and so creative. So I highly recommend that you check out that author if you haven't already. Another author that I think is worth checking out for short fantasy novels is T. Kingfisher. So they have written quite a few shorter fantasy novels, including A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, you've got Paladin's Grace and Thornhedge. But the book that I'm going to recommend to you today, my favourite shorter fantasy that I've read of theirs, is Nettle and Bone. So this one comes in at 319 pages in the hardcover, so it's not too long and it's a really fun story. This is a fairy tale-like story, but it likes to kind of subvert our expectations, which is something that I really like, which makes it feel quite refreshing, even though it has some of the elements that you would expect from a fairy tale-like story. So in this book we're following our main character, who is a woman called Mara, and she is on a quest to save her sister from an abusive relationship. So her sister is married off to the prince, who is an absolutely awful person. So Mara decides to take it upon herself to rescue her, and she seeks help from this really powerful grave witch who kind of comes up with a plan, and she joins together with a ragtag group of individuals to go and try and rescue her sister and to stop this tyrant prince ruler once and for all. And yes, it does deal with some heavier themes. Obviously, please do check out trigger warnings for abuse, things like that. And there is a little bit of darkness to the story, which gives it a bit of an edge, but it is also really humorous as well. There are some really light-hearted moments, some really funny moments. It has some really lovable characters in here, definitely a found family element at the heart of this story, and it's just a tale that you can't help but root for. And it's also set in a really whimsical and creative, magical setting as well. So it's just everything that you would want from a fairy tale like fantasy story, and it's all wrapped up nicely in one short novel. So yes, I definitely recommend this one to you, particularly if you like darker fairy tale type stories with a little bit of humour. This is the one that you're looking for. Next, I want to recommend to you a fantasy novella, which is the first in a series. So I'm talking about Empress of Salt and Fortune by Vo. So this is actually the first book in the Singing Hills series, which is a series of short fantasy novellas. And I read this one a really long time ago, and I remember just being really captivated by the writing and the message at the heart of this story. So this is essentially a lyrically written story about the importance of storytelling and holding on to people's memories. And in this first story, we follow a cleric who is gathering stories about the empress who recently passed away. And I feel like that's all you really need to know going into this one, because it's only 119 pages long, but it is a feminist story and it's just incredibly beautifully told. And I am very excited to carry on with this series, which I really need to, because I read this first one ages ago and for some reason I haven't read the sequels. But yes, if you enjoy beautiful writing, then I think that you would enjoy this one. My next recommendation for you is Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. This is one of my favourite fantasy novellas, so I'm sorry if you've heard me talking about this one before, but I just love it, honestly. It's the first in a duology. I think it's called the Green Hollow series, and this first book is only 112 pages long, so it's very, very short, and it's so beautifully written. It follows a wild man called Tobias who is tethered to a forest, and he lives a really peaceful life in this cottage in the woods. Then one day he is discovered by this man called Henry Silver, who has become the new owner of Green Hollow and the forest where Tobias lives. And the two meet each other, they get to know each other, they form a friendship, and as they are kind of getting to know each other, secrets get dug up about Tobias's past, and that's all I want to say because I don't want to give any spoilers. But yeah, this is a beautiful story. It's quite poignant and emotional at times. It does have a darkness to it as well at moments to give it a little bit of spice, a little bit of edge to it. But it's also just really sumptuous in its descriptions. It really is transportive. It makes you feel like you are there in the quiet beauty of the forest. It makes you think about nature and appreciate those little things, little moments, little beauties that are surrounding us. And for that reason, I just absolutely loved this story. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed that one and highly recommend it to you. Next up, we have Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a delightfully odd book and it's nice and short as well. This one comes in at like 240-ish pages, so nice and quick. And this is a story that I feel like is better to go into without having too many expectations, without knowing too much about the story, because the mystery at the heart of this is kind of what compels you. So I don't really want to tell you too much about this one, but very, very briefly, we basically follow a man who lives in this massive house, and the house is not like an ordinary building. It's infinitely huge. The rooms are massive, the corridors are endless, and this man basically spends his life exploring the corridors and exploring the rooms within this house and mapping it out, and that is his entire existence. And as he's exploring, he starts to uncover some truths that will shatter his reality, and that's all I'm going to say. This is definitely one of those stories that is quite bizarre, and you're not supposed to know what's going on right from the beginning. It's supposed to be ambiguous, it's supposed to be a little bit confusing in the beginning. You are reading from our main character's point of view, who himself doesn't really know what's happening and is trying to piece things together. So you have to go into this one being okay with not knowing exactly what's happening. But I just thought that the main character's perspective was so fascinating, and I loved the setting. I thought it was so creative. This house that is infinitely huge, where the upper floors are like up in the clouds, the lower floors are submerged in the ocean, and just seeing it through our main character's perspective and how he viewed his world and his house was so beautiful to me, and I just loved it. So yeah, I recommend this to you if you're looking for something a little bit different and perhaps a little bit strange. The next book I want to recommend to you is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This is a standalone fantasy book, and it's, I think, just over 300 pages. Oh no, it's less than 300 pages long. So again, nice and short, and I love this one. This is more of like a gothic, dreamlike story that stays with you like a fever dream. So if you like strange, beautiful, lyrical, whimsical, also slightly gothic and dark stories, then I think that you would really enjoy this one. This is about a man who marries a beautiful, wealthy woman called Indigo. But there's one condition: in exchange for Indigo's love, the bridegroom must never ask questions about her past. So he agrees to this, they get married, they have a beautiful life, but then fate brings them back to Indigo's childhood home, and when they arrive there, the bridegroom finds it increasingly difficult to keep to his promise. You know, he starts to have questions about his wife and her childhood, and we watch as that kind of unfolds, and that's all I'm going to say. Yeah, this one has really lyrical, beautiful prose. Like I say, it's very dreamlike, very whimsical, so if you like that kind of thing, then you'll enjoy this one. The writing is really sumptuous, so if you really enjoy beautiful writing, then I think again you would really enjoy this one, and I just loved it. So yeah, highly recommend that. My next recommendation for you is God Killer by Hannah Kaner. So this is actually the first book in a fantasy trilogy, so you would be investing into a series, but the books are actually pretty short for fantasy series, especially for epic fantasy that has, you know, a decent amount of world building and things like that in it. I think this first book comes in at just over 300 pages, so compared to other fantasy books and fantasy series, that is pretty short. And to me, this one really reads like an epic fantasy but without any of the filler, and so it makes for a really pacey read, so I think that might be good if you're looking for a quick fantasy. For me, I actually prefer epic fantasy that has a slower pace. I like things that are drawn out a bit more, where we get a little bit more filler, a little bit more depth, and a little bit more exploration. So for that reason, I didn't actually enjoy this one as much as other people seem to, but I did still want to recommend it here in this video because I think it fits the prompt of a short fantasy really well. And also the third book, Faith Breaker, recently came out, so you could binge the series if you want to, and you would be in on the conversation because people are talking about this series at the moment. So yes, and you know, this one has some really good things going for it as well. I did enjoy elements of it, particularly the prologue of the first book really grips you. It's so exciting, one of the best prologues I've read for a while. It really kind of throws you in to the action, which is very exciting. And this first book basically follows our main character, who is a woman called Kissin, who is a god killer, which is exactly what you would think it is. She basically makes a living killing gods, but she ends up getting involved with this young girl who has actually become bound to a god. It's the god of white lies, and so Kissing can't kill this god because she wants to protect the young girl, and so she ends up going on a quest with this young noble girl to try and help her, basically. And there's a lot more to it, there's a lot more to the world building and things, but that is kind of the bare bones of the first story. So yes, that's that one. Next up I have some obvious choices, and that would be Legends and Lattes and also Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldry. These are the short cozy fantasy books that took the world by storm. They were hugely popular on BookTube and on BookTok, so I'm sure you've probably heard about them before, so I'll keep this quite brief, but I just love these cozy fantasies. They are such a delight. If you haven't heard it before, the first book follows an orc barbarian called Viv who decides to hang up her sword and instead open a coffee shop. And then this second book is actually a prequel, and it follows Viv as she's injured in battle and ends up having to rest up in this sleepy seaside town. And both of these books are basically like a warm hug. They're filled with lovable characters, found family, a little splash of romance, and of course coffee and baked goods. So these are the perfect quick stories to just cozy up with if you're wanting something light that doesn't have really intense stakes. And another popular one that I wanted to recommend to you is the Wayward Children series by Shannon Maguire, starting with Every Heart of the Way. This is, of course, a series of portal fantasy books. It takes place in a boarding school for children who have travelled to other magical worlds and then have been forced to come back to the real world. And each book follows a different child as the main protagonist, and it follows a different magical world, so the world that they actually went to. So each book has quite a different feel. And what I love about this series is that the books are so whimsical and fun, but they're also edged with a little bit of darkness too, and they deal with some interesting themes like belonging and the complexities of childhood. So there's actually more to them than you would think from, you know, a short fantasy novella that sounds like it's just going to be a light-hearted fluffy time, when actually it deals with more than that, and it does actually make you think and challenge your assumptions and things like that. So yeah, I really enjoy this series. I think they are so fun and so creative and popular, again for a really good reason. And then the final book that I wanted to recommend to you is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. So this is actually a much heavier recommendation, definitely the most heavy book on this list. So please check out content warnings for this one, because it does deal with some very difficult topics, including generational trauma, slavery, self-harm, an endless list, so please be careful going into this one. But it is a short fantasy novella that is incredibly thought-provoking and incredibly moving. It follows a society of mer people who are the descendants of pregnant slaves that were thrown overboard, you know, from the slave ships. So they have this incredibly traumatic history and past. And we follow the perspective of Yitu, who has the incredibly difficult job of holding the memories of her people because their past is too traumatic to be remembered by everybody regularly. So they nominate one person whose job it is to hold on to their history, and then I think it's once a year or once every so often they share their memory of their past with everybody in this kind of like ritual thing, and then after that's happened they take the memories back and hold on to them themselves. So you can imagine that is incredibly difficult and challenging job. It's truly heartbreaking, but it's also really beautifully executed. So if you want something that is thought-provoking, something that's moving, but also something that's really creative, so it's using the fantasy genre to discuss some really interesting human challenging topics, then I really rate that story. So there we have it. Those are some books that I recommend to you if you're looking for short fantasy. I also wanted to include some honourable mentions, so some books that I haven't actually read yet but are on my Kindle and are on my TBR. So So I thought I'd mention them here just in case you're looking for some more recommendations. So the first one is The Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia McKillip. So this is kind of like a classic fantasy novella, and it follows a 16-year-old girl who lives alone on a mountain with only the mythical creatures that her late father conjured for her for company. So she's had a very isolated life, but then everything gets turned upside down when she is entrusted with the care of her cousin's newborn. So she has to raise this baby. And yeah, we followed that story. That's all I know. The other one that is on my Kindle that I haven't read yet but want to is The King of Elfhand's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. So this one, according to Goodreads, is 240 pages long, and it was first published in January 1924. So it is a classic. And it says on the website, the poetic style and sweeping grandeur of The King of Elfhand's Daughter has made it one of the most beloved fantasy novels of our time, a masterpiece that influenced some of the greatest contemporary fantasists. The heartbreaking story of a marriage between a mortal man and an elf princess is a masterful tapestry of the fairy tale following the happily ever after. So it sounds like it's kind of the origin for those types of fairy tale-like stories. And so for that reason, I would really like to go back and read that one. And yeah, that brings me to the end of this list. So those were some recommendations from me for short fantasy stories. If you have some more recommendations, please do leave them in the comment section down below so other people can find some more recommendations if they're on the hunt for this type of story. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you found it useful. As always, don't forget to like this video if you did like it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!